Hi everyone, my name is Ellie Miles. I'm one of two documentary curators at London Transport Museum. Thanks to Museums and Heritage Show for asking me to present some work that we've been doing at LTM and with some freelancers and externals and some partners elsewhere about looking at the ethics of contemporary collecting. So earlier this year, we published an edited toolkit, which is free to view and download from the London Transport Museum website as a PDF. There's also a Word version, which might be more accessible for people using screen readers. So the toolkit is focused on 5 different themes, which we think have interesting or useful resources for those undertaking or wishing to undertake contemporary collecting projects. The aim of the toolkit is kind of twofold. Partly it's to highlight and share good practice, and partly it's to become accountable and make visible some of the processes and ethical judgments that curators and museum workers make when conducting contemporary collecting. We published this in March, at the end of March 2020. And since then, we've obviously seen across the sector lots and lots of collecting projects set up to address the disruption and upheaval caused this year through the advent of coronavirus and subsequent lockdown restrictions and situations evolving from that. So it seems like this toolkit has come at a reasonably useful time. And so what I'll do, I think, in this talk is just run through some of the different sections and let you know what's in it in case you haven't already seen it. So this is the cover, obviously. And as I said, you'll be able to download this from the London Transport Museum website. So it's www.ltmuseum.co.uk/collection/projects/documentary curator. So the first theme that we thought was really important to address was the idea of balance. So often museums kind of enact their aspirations of neutrality by trying to frame or present balanced two sides approach to objects or collections or material which might be related to what they would describe as a contentious subject. However, for many people, this is actually can be quite a dangerous approach with significant risk to those affected. Sometimes in a society as divided as ours, we find that presenting two sides to what could be seen as a contentious issue might actually involve platforming hateful or harmful material. So this chapter looks to address how that, this section looks to address how that might be done in an ethical way and highlight some of the issues around framing. And this has some fantastic case studies from Jen Kavanagh and from Sam Jenkins at the People's History Museum. The next theme that we wanted to address in the toolkit was the subject of decolonisation. Often in the media, decolonisation is identified as primarily a subject which involves thinking about how we might return objects acquired during colonial times to different communities. And what this toolkit kind of looks at is an understanding that many museum objects have been acquired contemporaneously in the past. And when we do contemporary collecting now, we've inherited lots of systems, methods and processes that are connected with that. And sometimes historic contemporary collecting has happened alongside violence, trauma, distress, and sometimes the processes that we inherit depersonalize, remove, dehumanize the people that have given objects. So this section, which has case studies from Charlotte Holmes and Rachel Minot, looks at ways that we ought to be thinking about and addressing ways to decolonise practice when it comes to contemporary collecting. The third theme is a really important thread as well, and this is looking at how museums, when they do contemporary collecting, interact and intersect with the topic of climate emergency. So in some ways, all of our contemporary collecting these days is inevitably a record of climate change and climate emergency. So you might be building a social history collection that involves a lot of single-use plastic. Well, that's a record and a document of what's happening today and where we are. It's got two parts to this section. One is a list of prompts and resources if you're planning to undertake contemporary collecting work, and some of these are as simple as thinking about the resources that you might use and any transport or journeys that you might make. And the second part is an interesting case study from Laura Boone from Royal Museums Greenwich. We're looking at a loan and some associated contemporary collecting carried out with the Extinction Rebellion movement. The fourth theme is one which I think we've all come to understand its role in contemporary collecting a little bit more this year as we live through the pandemic. And this is the subject of trauma and distress. Sometimes when we conduct contemporary collecting, we might be inviting people to reflect or share memories or experiences that might have been incredibly upsetting and may have involved significant mental health challenges and other consequences that we may not know if we are conducting a relatively short or even a long-term contemporary collecting project. So this section has a really useful case study by Jess and Matt at the Museum of Homelessness, which looks at how to collect in ways which minimise the risk of harm to your donors. It's a really powerful piece which gives a lot of information about how that can be done. The fifth theme that we identified as having useful, that we might be able to provide useful resources around in the toolkit was the question of digital preservation. So just because a collection is by its nature made up of a different kind of object, in this case perhaps born digital material, it's important to recognise that there may still be an inherited legacy of issues around that. Just because the medium is new doesn't mean that the challenges and exclusions and associations with that will also be different or distinctive. So for this project, for this part of the project, we've included sections from Bill Lowry at the Museum of London, looking at some of the technical requirements of digital preservation and unpacking those and pointing to further resources. We've included a section from Aaron Rees about social media and memes becoming museum objects and what that might mean, and also some case studies from the Collecting Social Photo project on the continent and the reflections on conducting work at different scales at different times with different subjects. We're hoping to run some reading groups and assess whether there's need for more themes and topics to be covered in the toolkit. And we'd like to run those in the coming months, coming year, just to see if there's a legacy edition might look a little bit different. So do look out for those. As you can guess, I've used a lot of London Transport Museum LTM collections images in this slideshow, so this one is a little bit more forced than some of the others. But thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope it's been an interesting outline to the project. It's, I think, a really useful resource, and it's been such a joy to be able to ask people to share their fantastic work and be able to learn from it. And I hope that others find the same thing and feel the same way about it, because it's been incredibly useful for my practice, certainly. Thank you so much for your